Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. At first glance, George Francis Robert Henderson seems a most unlikely biographer of the man pictured here, Stonewall Jackson, an English born 6-year old child when Southern cannon fire ignited the Civil War at Fort Sumter. Henderson received an education at Oxford and the Royal Military College before serving as an officer in the British Army in India, Egypt, South Africa, and then teaching as well at his alma mater, the Royal Military College. His academic career included studies of Americans, the Fredericksburg Campaign, and the project for which historians consider Henderson's masterpiece, the 1898 two-volume set Stonewall Jackson and the American Civil War. The biography traces Jackson from West Point until his death at Chancellorsville, with many references to Napoleon, whose maxims of war Jackson and so many other generals of that time period studied. The final chapter in Henderson's book is titled The Soldier and the Man. It's a review of Jackson's military abilities in context to his emergence as a national military figure and a leader of the Confederate nation. Henderson goes on to offer his thoughts about whether Jackson might have replaced Lee. I want to share Henderson's evaluation and thoughts with you. Henderson begins. It can hardly be questioned that at the time of his death, Jackson was the leader most trusted by the Confederates and most dreaded by the Federals. His own soldiers, and with them, the whole population of the South, believed him capable of any task, invincible except by fate. It never indeed fell to Jackson's lot to lead a great army or to plan a great campaign. The operations in the valley, Shenandoah Valley, although decisive in their results, were comparatively insignificant in respect both of the numbers employed and of the extent of the theater. Jackson was not wholly independent. His was but a secondary role, and he had to weigh at every turn the orders and instructions of his superiors. His hand was never absolutely free. His authority did not reach beyond certain limits, and his operations were confined to one locality. He was never permitted to cross the border, nor when he joined Lee before Richmond was the restraint removed. In the campaign against Pope and in the reduction of Harper's Ferry, he was certainly entrusted with tasks which led to complete severance from the main body of the army. But the severance was merely temporary. He was the most trusted of Lee's lieutenants, but he was only a lieutenant. He had never the same liberty of action as those of his contemporaries who rose to historic fame, as Lee himself, as Johnston or Beauregard, as Grant or Sherman or as Sheridan, and consequently, he had never a real opportunity for revealing the height and breadth of his military genius. The Civil War was prolific of great leaders, the young American generals, inexperienced as they were in dealing with large armies and compelled to improvise their tactics as they improvised their staff, displayed a talent for command such as soldiers more regularly trained could hardly have surpassed. Neither the deficiencies of their material nor the difficulties of the theater of war were to be lightly overcome. And yet, their methods displayed a refreshing originality. Not only in mechanical auxiliaries did the inventive genius of their race find scope, the principles which govern civilized warfare, the rules which control the employment of each arm, the technical and mechanical arts were rapidly modified to the exigencies of the troops and of the country. Cavalry, entrenchments, the railway, the telegraph, balloons, signaling were all used in a manner which had been hitherto unknown. Monitors and torpedoes were for the first time seen, and even the formations of infantry were made sufficiently elastic to meet the requirements of a modern battlefield. Nor was the conduct of the operations fettered by an adherence to conventional practice. From first to last, the campaigns were characterized by daring and often skillful maneuvers. And if the tactics of the battlefield were often less brilliant than the preceding movements, not only are parallels to these tactics to be found in almost every campaign of history, but they would probably have escaped criticism had the opponent been less skillful. But among the galaxy of leaders, Confederate and Federal, in none had the soldiers such implicit confidence as in Stonewall Jackson. And then the Southern soldiers, highly educated as many of them were, no better judges of military capacity were ever known. Nevertheless, the opinion of the soldiers is no convincing proof that Jackson was equal to the command of a large army or that he could have carried through a great campaign. Had Lee been disabled, it might be asked, would Jackson have proved a sufficient substitute? Military genius shows itself first in character and second in the application of the grand principles of warfare, not in the mere manipulation of armed masses. It cannot well be denied that Jackson possessed every single attribute which makes for success in war. Morally and physically, he was absolutely fearless. He accepted responsibilities with the same equanimity that he faced bullets of the enemy. He permitted no obstacle to turn him aside from his appointed path. And in seizing an opportunity or in following up a victory, he was the very incarnation of untiring energy. He had no moments of weakness. He was not robust, and his extraordinary exertions told upon his constitution. My health, he wrote to his wife in January of 1863, is essentially good, but I do not think I shall be able in future to stand what I have already stood. And yet his will invariably rose superior to bodily exhaustion. A supreme activity, both of brain and body, was a prominent characteristic of his military life. His idea of strategy was to secure the initiative, however inferior his force, to create opportunities and to utilize them, to waste no time, and to give the enemy no rest. War, he said, means fighting. The business of the soldier is to fight. Armies are not called out to dig trenches, to throw up breastworks, to live in camps, but to find the enemy and strike him, to invade his country and do him all possible damage in the shortest possible time. This will involve great destruction of life and property while it lasts, but such a war will of necessity be of brief continuance, and so would be an economy of life and property in the end. To move swiftly, strike vigorously, and secure all the fruits of victory is the secret of successful war. So there you have Henderson's analysis, if you will, of Stonewall Jackson, the soldier, the man, and what he might have done if he had been given an opportunity to command in a larger way, not be a lieutenant to Robert E. Lee, but be his own general in command of an army with freedom to roam and make his own plans and make things happen. So thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.